My son looked at me that night with an expression I'll never forget and said, without hesitating, "I can't stand having to feed you anymore, Dad." Just like that, no beating around the bush, as if every plate on the table had been a sacrifice. I just stared at him without saying a word. I smiled, not a mocking smile, but that half-smile of someone who has finally understood everything. Because when a son says that to you, you don't need to argue, you just need to take a deep breath and accept what your heart already knew. And right there, as the silence weighed heavily between us, I made myself a promise. The next day, I was going to do something he would never forget. My name is Sterling. I'm 76 years old, and I was born in a small town in Texas. I've worked my whole life since I was a boy, first in the fields carrying baskets and tending to animals, then in construction, laying bricks under the sun until my hands bled. That's how I provided for my family. I was never a man of luxuries, but I was a man of my word. I was married to the same woman for over 40 years. My hope. A strong, quiet woman, the kind who doesn't need to say much to hold a home together. We had 3 sons, but life, well, sometimes life makes decisions for you. One died young, another moved far away and doesn't even call on holidays. And I was left with one Robert. The quietest one, the proudest one, the one who said he would always be with me. When Hope passed away, I was left alone in our little house. A humble home, but one built with effort and memories. It was there we raised all 3 of them, where we cried together, where we celebrated first communions, birthdays with piñatas, and Sundays with a pot of beans on the stove. But after the funeral, Robert spoke to me with that convincing voice of his. "Come live with us, Dad. I don't want you to be alone. There's room here." And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think there was still some family warmth left. So I packed my suitcase, put away the photo of Hope, turned off the lights in my house, and went with him. At first, everything seemed fine. They gave me a room in the back with a tiny window. His wife, Patricia, was a bit cold but polite. My grandchildren were my joy. 2 lively kids who would come running to hug me when they got home from school. I helped however I could. I swept the patio, washed the dishes, warmed tortillas. I never asked for anything. But little by little, you start to notice the cracks. First, it was the coffee that would disappear from the table. Then Patricia's subtle comments. That the gas was running out faster. That we needed to cut back on expenses. Then lunches became shorter, more silent. I started to feel that my presence wasn't so welcome. Robert became more distant, busy with a tired look in his eyes whenever I opened my mouth to tell a story. And I get it, you know. Not all children know how to grow old with their parents. But that night was different. There were no hints or sighs. There were words, harsh words. "I can't stand having to feed you anymore." And he said it like someone talking about a piece of old furniture that's in the way. I didn't answer, I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just smiled. Why? Because I understood. I understood that to my son I was no longer his father. I was just another burden in his life. That night I went back to my room in silence. I closed the door softly. I sat on the bed. I didn't turn on the light. I stayed in the darkness, feeling the silence grow thicker. And there I told myself, tomorrow everything is going to change. Because when you lose a son's respect, the only thing left to do is to respect yourself. I slept little, but at dawn I got up early. I put on my favorite shirt, the one Hope had given me on our last anniversary. I combed my hair carefully, as if it were a Sunday. I put some papers in my briefcase, grabbed my cane, and left without making a sound. No one saw me leave. No one stopped me. I walked slowly through the neighborhood streets, greeting the baker, the security guard, a neighbor who barely recognized me. I was in no hurry. What I was about to do required calm and dignity, because sometimes a father's silence hurts more than any word. And I, Sterling, decided that day that the silence was over. So do this. Listen to this story until the end. Because what happened after that walk, no one in that house saw coming. And share it with someone who needs to hear this. And tell me what part of this story truly touched your heart. And from what city in the world are you listening? I returned to the house just before nightfall. No one had noticed my absence. Patricia was in the kitchen chopping something without looking at me. Robert, sitting on the couch with his phone in his hand, was so absorbed in his world that he didn't even look up. I walked to my room with a calm pace, as always. I closed the door, hung up my shirt carefully, and sat again on that bed that no longer felt like mine. I felt like a guest with no departure date, someone tolerated, barely noticed. But that night, although my body was there, my decision was already made. Something inside me had aligned like a column that was about to break, but firmly decided not to. I got up early the next day before dawn. I made my own coffee with the little I had left hidden in the pantry and went out again towards downtown. There at the county clerk's office, I walked in with a firm step. The young woman at the reception recognized me immediately. "Mr. Sterling, what a pleasure to see you here again." I just smiled at her. It was time to set things straight. The deed to my house, my own house, was still in my name. No one in that family knew, but I never sold it. I had only rented it out to a trusted old friend. And not just that. I had an old savings account, modest but steady. Money I had saved up during all those years of hard work. The truth is, I never depended on anyone. I stayed at Robert's house, out of affection, out of a desire to feel like I still had a family. But affection that isn't returned is a dead weight. And I was no longer willing to carry it. After the clerk's office, I went to the bank. I verified everything. I updated my information. I changed my passwords. I signed documents. I requested my bank statements and put them away carefully. And then I went to a place that Robert didn't even know existed. A small cottage I inherited from my father, far from everything in a rural area. It had been empty for years. But it was still mine. A simple roof. A large plot of land. Fruit trees. Silence. That's where I was going to start over. Without luxuries, but with peace. And more importantly, with freedom. I returned home that afternoon with a different kind of serenity. Patricia, as usual, didn't say a word to me. Robert, seeing me walk in, blurted out, "Oh, the old man's back," and he chuckled to himself. I almost found it funny. He had no idea. I slept peacefully that night. And the next day, I waited for everyone to leave. I started to pack my things. I folded each item of clothing calmly. I gathered my papers. I placed Hope's photos in the suitcase with care. And when I was done, I left an envelope on the kitchen table. Inside, a note written in my firm handwriting. "Thank you for everything. Don't worry about feeding me anymore. That's already taken care of. God bless you." I closed the door behind me without making a sound. I walked to the bus station. I was carrying a backpack, a suitcase, and a relief in my chest I hadn't felt in years. The trip to the little house took about 3 hours. When I arrived, the country air embraced me as if to say, "Welcome home." I spent the day cleaning what was necessary, dusting off old furniture, hanging up the hammock. I cooked my own beans with garlic and chili just the way I like them. And I ate with pleasure, calmly, without feeling like a burden, without anyone reminding me that I was in the way. That night, lying in my hammock, looking at the stars through the living room window, I thought about everything. About how you think you need a full house to feel alive. But the truth is, a house full of contempt is worth less than a humble corner filled with respect. For the first time in a long time, I slept with peace in my heart. And in that good silence, I understood. It wasn't me who needed them. I never did. But they were about to notice my absence, and that was just beginning. The first few days in the little country house felt like a long, deep breath. I would wake up early as I always had before the sun came up. I'd light the wood stove, make my strong coffee, the kind that wakes you to your bones. I'd sit on the small bench on the patio, listening to the neighbors' roosters crowing in the distance. I had no television, no internet, no one to talk to. But I had something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Silence without tension. Time without guilt. Space without blame. I dedicated myself to fixing the leaks in the roof, clearing the weeds in the garden, repairing the fence. I went back and forth to the town market, where the old men still tip their hats in greeting, and the children run barefoot. I didn't need much. I'd buy my vegetables some bread, a small piece of fresh cheese, and every so often, a little meat for the weekend. I quickly got used to living with little because I was tired of living with too much disrespect. But even if the soul is still the heart, takes longer. And there was something inside me I couldn't let go of. It wasn't anger, no, it wasn't hate. It was disappointment. The quiet kind that doesn't make a sound, but is heavy. Because no matter how much you convince yourself you're better off alone, there's a part of you that keeps asking how we got here. How did we get to the point where a son looks you in the eye and tells you he resents feeding you? How do you reach that level of insensitivity, of forgetfulness? Sometimes I would sit in the hammock with an old notebook and start writing down random things. Memories, phrases, dates. I wrote so I wouldn't forget who I was, because I realized something important. When they make you feel like you're worthless, you can start to believe it yourself. And I wasn't going to allow that. Not after everything I'd lived through. Not after everything I'd fought for. One day while I was sweeping the patio, I saw a young man approaching on a bicycle. His face was dusty, and he had a backpack on his shoulder. He greeted me from a distance. "Mr. Sterling?" I nodded, curious. "Mr. Ortiz sent me the one who was renting your house. He said you wanted me to bring you some papers." He handed me a thick envelope and thanked me for the glass of water I offered him. Inside the envelope were the updated documents for the rental contract with a note from Mr. Ortiz. "Everything is going well. I've already deposited this month's rent. Whatever you need, I'm at your service." I smiled. Not because of the money, but because of the feeling that something, at least something, was still functioning with respect. A few more weeks passed. I got used to the rhythm of my new life. In town, people started to recognize me. They'd call me the old man from the white cottage. They'd give me oranges from their trees. They'd invite me to church. Even the priest once asked me to help fix some pews. And I, with my rusty tools but my steady hand, I felt useful again, valued. Until one day, without expecting it, I saw him in the distance. He was walking from the highway, his shirt soaked with sweat. Robert, my son, stopped in front of the gate. He didn't say anything at first. He looked at me as if he didn't know if he had permission to come in, I who in another time would have run to hug him. This time I stayed seated, calmly. I looked at him intently, without anger, without urgency. I gestured with my hand. Let him pass. He entered slowly, like someone stepping on unfamiliar ground. He sat on a rock in front of me. He took a deep breath. He said, "Dad, we've been looking for you for days. We thought something bad had happened to you." I didn't answer because there was no point in justifying myself. They knew where I had gone. They just didn't care until they noticed I was missing. And absence sometimes shouts louder than presence. "Patricia is worried. The kids are asking for you." And he kept talking with that voice that mixes guilt and pride. I just looked at him wordless. Sometimes silence says more. Then he broke down, and he looked at me, as if he wanted to cry but didn't know how, until he finally let it out. What I said that night was horrible. I wasn't thinking. I was tired. I felt suffocated by everything. "But you didn't deserve that, Dad." That I heard. I heard it with a tight chest. But it didn't move me. Not out of malice, but because you learn that words, when they come too late, don't heal, they only explain. I told him in a soft voice, "I didn't leave because of what you said, Robert. I left because I realized you all didn't want me there anymore. Because you don't beg for respect. And affection, when you have to plead for it, is no longer affection." He fell silent. He lowered his head. He didn't insist. He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't offer me anything. He just stood up, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, "I wanted to see you to know you were okay. That's all." And he left. I watched him walk away down the dirt road under the midday sun. I didn't stop him. I didn't hug him. But I didn't reject him either. Because what I did wasn't for revenge. It was for me. For my dignity. For my soul. And I understood that sometimes the bravest act isn't to stay, but to leave. And he never came back after that. Ever since that day Robert came to see me, he never showed up again. Not a call, not a letter, not a message sent through someone else. Nothing. But I wasn't surprised. Because deep down I already knew that visit hadn't been out of love. It was out of shock. He came because for the first time in his life he felt he had lost me. And some people don't value their own until they're gone. But what I did wasn't a punishment or a lesson. It was a decision. And I wasn't going back. The days in the little house remained peaceful. I had established a firm routine. On Mondays I cleaned the yard. Tuesdays I made preserves. Wednesdays I walked to town. Mr. Ortiz brought me the rent on time, and that was enough for me to live well. No luxuries, but with dignity. I got used to the silence to my hammock in the afternoon, to handmade tortillas. I even started writing every night in a blue notebook. Reflections, phrases, memories. Some so old I wasn't sure if they were real or just images my mind created to comfort me. One Sunday, while sweeping the front of the house, I heard a car stop. It was Father Angel, the town priest. He got out with a serene smile, as always. "Mr. Sterling, can I steal a few minutes of your time?" I invited him in. We sat under the shade of the pecan tree. He told me about the community, about a fair they were going to have, and if I could help build some shelves for the school. I said yes, gladly. And just like that, without meaning to, I started to feel useful again. Working with wood gave me back something I didn't know I missed. Purpose. Over time, my name started to be known among the neighbors. The old man from the country who helps everyone. They would invite me for lunch, give me homemade bread, leave fruit at my gate. One afternoon, a woman even asked me to talk to her rebellious grandson. And I, without knowing how, ended up giving him a piece of advice that came from the soul. Listen to your grandmother's son. You don't know what you have until you see it from a distance. The boy looked at me as if he'd never heard that before. Maybe no one had ever told him. One morning in June, I ran into Mrs. Nellie at the market, an older woman who had been my neighbor back in my old house. She was surprised to see me. "You're Robert's father, right?" "Oh, my dear, it's a shame what they're saying around here." I stood still. "They say he's out of a job, that his wife went to her parents' house, and that he's having trouble with the house where he lived." I didn't ask for more details. It wasn't my style. But that night when I got home, I sat in my hammock with a heavy heart. Not out of sadness, but from a strange mix of pain and calm. Because life always gives back what you sow. The days passed. And one afternoon, while I was fixing a bench at the church, Mr. Ortiz approached me. He was agitated, nervous. "Mr. Sterling, I don't know if I should tell you this, but your son came to see me. He wanted to know if you had left him anything, some inheritance. He asked if you had transferred properties or accounts to me." I remained silent. I didn't tell him anything, of course, but it made me sad, not for him, but for you. I nodded because I understood. It wasn't the first time someone had looked for their father only when they needed something. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't going to open the door. I wasn't going to go back. Because the respect that is lost takes a lifetime to recover. And in my case, I no longer had time to beg for affection. That night I wrote in my notebook, "Some sons forget they were once children, and some fathers forget they deserve to rest." I closed the notebook, poured myself a hot tea, and watched the moon from the doorway. I thought about Hope, about how she would have handled all this. How her soft voice would have told me, "Let them be Sterling. Everyone reaps what they sow." But it wasn't just about letting go. It was about closing the chapter. It was about healing. It was about putting a final end to it. The next day I received a letter with no return address. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from Robert. A sheet of paper folded in 4. He was asking for forgiveness. He said he was sorry. That everything had fallen apart since I left. That he couldn't find peace. That he needed me. That he wanted me to come back. I read the letter 3 times. There wasn't a single mention of genuine affection. Only need. Pain. Regret for what he lost. Not for what he did to me. I didn't answer. I burned the letter in the stove, slowly watching it turn to ash. Because sometimes forgiveness isn't in going back. It's in letting go. And I finally was free. And that freedom was the most precious gift life had given me. But what was to come next was yet to be written. That month it rained like it hadn't rained in years. The afternoons were filled with gray skies. Mud crept up the roads, and the trees at the back of the property burst with life. Everything was green, wet, and silent. I would spend hours on the cottage porch with my steaming cup of coffee, listening to the water beat against the tin roof and the wind whistle through the corners. It didn't bother me. I liked it. Rain has a way of stirring up your thoughts and setting your soul in order without asking permission. One morning, while I was turning the soil in the garden to plant some chili peppers, I heard someone call my name from the entrance. I wiped my hands on a cloth and looked over. It was Marcella, the daughter of Mr. Emiliano, the owner of the town's hardware store. She was walking quickly, carrying an envelope in her hand. "Mr. Sterling, good morning. This letter is for you." A young man left it at the store early this morning. He said it was urgent, but he didn't want to give his name. I thanked her, offered to make her some coffee, but she was in a hurry. She left me the envelope and went on her way. I held it in my hand for a moment. It wasn't heavy or long, just a page, maybe 2. But it had that smell of the past that you recognize when something hasn't been properly closed. I opened it slowly, sitting under the pecan tree. It was from Robert again. "Dad, I know you might not want to read this, but I don't have many ways left to talk to you. I've looked for you, I've written, you don't answer. I don't know if you're angry, hurt, or simply don't want me in your life anymore. And if that's the case, I understand. I deserve it. But I had to write to you even if it's for the last time. I kept reading without moving a muscle. Not because it hurt me, but because I no longer knew if I cared. Things here have gotten difficult. Patricia left with the kids. She says she needs some time, that I'm not the man I used to be. I lost my job 2 months ago, and I haven't been able to pay the mortgage. The bank called me. They said if I don't get the money, they're going to take the house. I'm desperate, Dad. I say this with shame, but also with humility. I need you. Not for your money, for you. I stopped there. I put the letter away. There was no need to read the rest. Because you just know you understand. And even if the words say one thing, the heart recognizes the intention. And my son's intention was not to reconnect, it was to save himself. I didn't sleep that night, not out of anguish, but out of thought. Because for the first time in my life, I had the power to act without fear, without guilt. And that at my age is a gift not to be taken for granted. The next morning I walked to town. I didn't go to the bank. I didn't go to the market. I went straight to the church. I sat in the last pew. There was no service, only the echo of birds and the melted wax of the candles. I closed my eyes. I spoke to Hope as I used to do when things were difficult. I didn't ask her for advice, I just told her what I was feeling. He needs me now, but not as a father, but as a lifeline. And you know what? I'm not sure I want to be that again. When I left the church, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to answer him. I wasn't going to write to him. I wasn't going to go. But I was going to protect the little I had left. Because even if he no longer sought me out with love, I was not going to allow the same son who told me he couldn't keep feeding me to now come and take what I built with my own hands. I went to the town lawyer, a short man with more papers than space on his desk. I told him my story without embellishment. I showed him my documents, my accounts, the deeds, and I told him clearly, I want to put everything in order, so that if one day something happens to me, no one can put their hands where they don't belong. The lawyer looked at me intently. He nodded. He prepared some papers for me. I signed with a calmness that made my fingers tremble. I made my will. I named a local foundation that helps abandoned elderly people as the beneficiary. I requested that my little house be used the day I am no longer here to house someone like me, an old man with nowhere else to go. I left there feeling lighter, not out of resentment, but out of justice. That afternoon, I wrote in my notebook, it's not about punishing the one who hurt you. It's about protecting the little you have left intact. Days later, Robert came to town. Marcella told me she saw him in the square asking for me. No one told him exactly where I lived. Not because they didn't know, but because here in this corner of the world, people know how to take care of their own. It's not that they're hiding me, it's that they're protecting me, and that is worth more than all the money I could have given him. That same night, someone left a package at my door. It had no name, just a small box with a photo inside. It was an old picture. Me holding Robert as a child in front of my old house. Underneath a handwritten note. Sorry for forgetting where I came from. I didn't cry. I didn't answer. I just put it in the drawer where I keep the unanswered letters, the memories that aren't thrown away, and the wounds that no longer bleed. Because now the wound was closing, but not everything had been said yet. What was going to happen next was going to mark my story forever. The weeks that followed were silent. A different kind of silence. Not the old kind that hurt. This was more of a firm silence, as if the pieces inside me had finally aligned. I would get up early, sweep the front of the house, walk to the garden, check on my plants. The neighbor's radio played old country songs, and sometimes I would listen from the patio, feeling that time was no longer chasing me, that I was finally walking with it. I didn't hear from Robert again. I heard from third parties that he had tried to sell his truck but didn't have the papers in order, that the house was in foreclosure, that Patricia was still living with her parents and had no intention of returning to him. I didn't ask anything, but the people in town talked sometimes out of gossip, other times out of compassion. But everyone knew one thing. I didn't want anyone to look for him on my behalf. I made that decision the day I burned his letter, and with each passing day, that decision became firmer in my spirit. One Thursday morning, the lawyer called me. He wanted me to stop by his office to sign the final documents. "Everything is in order, Mr. Sterling. No one will be able to claim a single brick when you're no longer here. And as long as you live, you are the absolute owner of your peace of mind." I thanked him with a firm handshake because what I had done wasn't just a legal procedure. It was closing a chapter. It was putting a lock on what used to open with a single tear. After leaving the office, I sat on a bench in the square. I had a sweet roll in one hand and the cool air on my face. I looked around. I saw some children playing, an old man reading an old newspaper, a woman selling flowers, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Not to a physical place, but to myself. That night I wrote something in my notebook that came from the soul. Sometimes true home isn't where you were born, it's where you are respected. A couple of days later, I went to visit Mrs. Lisa, a widowed lady, who lived alone in a house a little further up the road. She always invited me for dinner and gave me hot soup like the kind Hope used to make. That night, she asked me if it didn't hurt me deep down that my son was suffering. I answered calmly, "Of course it hurts, but you can't heal in the same place where you were broken." She looked at me for a long time. Then she got up, put a blanket over my shoulders and said, "You're not alone, Mr. Sterling. We love you here." That sentence stuck with me. The next day, very early, someone knocked on my door. It was a young man with a backpack looking nervous. He told me he came on behalf of a lawyer from the city, that Robert was trying to file a claim to prove that I had disinherited him unfairly, that he wanted to contest the will. I looked at him serenely. I offered him a glass of water and said, "Tell whoever sent you not to worry anymore. What was mine is still mine, but my peace, that is priceless." The young man left confused. Maybe he thought I was going to get angry or cry, but not anymore. I had no more tears for those who only knew how to look for me out of self-interest. That same day, I went to the bank, closed the old accounts, opened a new one in the name of the foundation, signed the last papers, and left clear instructions. No family member could access anything. The bank manager, a serious and respectful man, shook my hand and said, "Few men make decisions like this in their lifetime. You haven't just put everything in order, you've left a lesson." And yes, maybe that was the only thing I could still leave behind. I returned home with a light soul. I cooked rice and eggs. I sat down to eat, looking at the open window through which a golden evening light streamed in. I thought of my younger granddaughter, the one who once approached me timidly to ask if I was poor because I ate beans every day. I told her no, that I was rich because I had never lost my appetite for life. Today, after everything, I think that was the most honest answer I'd given in many years. Before sleeping, I lit a candle, not out of superstition, but for hope. I sat in front of her photo and spoke to her. I didn't see him again, my love, and I don't know if I ever will, but I finally understood that it wasn't my job to carry him. Not anymore, not again. And then I closed my eyes. I slept like I hadn't slept in years, without anger, without fear, without waiting, because sometimes the strongest act of love is to leave without closing the door, but knowing that you have no intention of ever walking back in. And that still wasn't the end. The hardest part was yet to come. That day dawned with a completely clear sky. It was strange because it had been raining every day for several weeks. But on that particular Sunday, the sun came out early, strong golden, as if to remind me that life went on. I got up earlier than usual. I made coffee in a pot with cinnamon, the way I liked to make it on Sundays when hope was alive. I sat on the patio to drink it slowly, watching the rays of light filter through the branches of the orange tree. The singing of the birds enveloped me, and for the first time in many years, I felt that I needed nothing more. Not a call, not a visit, not an apology that never came. I was fine just like this. Finally, fine. I was sweeping the entrance of the house when I saw him. He was coming down the dirt road, walking slowly with a backpack on his shoulder, and his gaze lost on the ground. I knew it was him from a distance. Robert. I wasn't surprised. I just stood there with the broom in my hand, watching him approach. When he stood before me, he lifted his eyes and fell silent. He looked tired, thinner, older. But what caught my attention the most was that he finally lowered his head. "Hello, Dad," he said, almost in a whisper. I didn't respond immediately. I turned, opened the patio gate, and gestured with my head for him to come in to sit down. I made him coffee, served it in the blue mug, the usual one. We sat across from each other in silence. He stared at the floor. I looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly. "I didn't come to ask for anything," he finally said without looking at me. "I just wanted to see you." I nodded. He didn't need to explain anything. I had already seen it all. "I lost the house. The bank took it. Patricia filed for divorce. She says she doesn't want the kids to see me like this, defeated without a job. I looked for help. No one opened their door for me." I said nothing. I just took another sip of coffee. And then I remembered. I remembered you. How you fed me when there was nothing. How you sold your tools to pay for my books. How you slept on the floor when I was sick and needed the bed. I remembered everything, Dad. Everything I forgot for years. He kept talking, but it was no longer my son speaking. It was a broken man, a man who had finally seen his own reflection. He lowered his voice as if he couldn't bear his own shame. And then I understood that the most terrible thing I did wasn't kicking you out of the house. It was making you feel like you were worthless. And there's something hit me in the chest. Not out of pity, but because for the first time in his life he told the truth. "I didn't come to ask you to come back or to forgive me. I just came to tell you that even if it's late, I respect you, Dad." He stood up. He looked me in the eyes for the first time in many years. And there I saw my son. Not the proud man who humiliated me, but the child who once took my hand in fear when we crossed the street together for the first time. "I'll leave you in peace," he said. "But I needed to tell you that." He walked out the same door he had entered. I didn't stop him. I didn't hug him. I didn't tell him everything was okay, because it wasn't. But this time, it didn't hurt me. I stood there watching the dust rise with his steps, and I knew that perhaps for the first time in a long time, he too was going to start walking his own path without using me as an excuse. That afternoon, I went to my room, took out the blue notebook, and wrote, "Respect that comes late doesn't heal, but at least it leaves no more wounds." And I closed the notebook with the tranquility of someone who no longer expects anything. What would come next wouldn't change me because this time I was already whole. 2 weeks passed since that last visit. I didn't hear from Robert again, nor did I expect to. I heard from Mrs. Nellie that he had been seen at the city market, looking for work, with the same backpack and the same silence on his face. I didn't ask for more details, not because I didn't care. You never stop feeling something for a son, but because I understood that our story had reached its conclusion. A final conversation, dry, real, and sufficient for him and for me. I continued with my simple life. I would get up early, take care of my plants, help at the church when needed. The townspeople no longer saw me as the old man from the country, but as Mr. Sterling, the man everyone respected. And that had a value that no one was going to take from me, not the bank, not the government, not even blood. One day in the square, I was invited to speak at a meeting of the senior center. They told me they wanted me to tell my story. I told them it was nothing special, that I had no great feats to recount. But they insisted. So I went. I sat in the middle of a dozen men and women with white hair and eyes full of journeys. And I spoke. I spoke calmly. I told them what my life was like before, how I built my house with hope, how we raised our children with tortillas, sweat, and patience, how I grew old with dignity. Until one day someone looked me in the eye and said, "I can't stand having to feed you anymore." I felt a lump in my throat, but I didn't lower my voice. I told them everything. Without drama, without shame. Because you don't have to hide what you've lived through even if it hurts. Because what is lived with dignity is told with pride. When I finished, no one applauded. But there was no need. A woman approached, took my hand and said, "Thank you for saying what many of us keep silent." And in that moment I knew my story wasn't just mine. That what I had suffered, others had also lived through in silence, out of fear, out of habit. And that speaking is also a way to heal. That night when I got home, I sat on the patio under the clear sky. It was cold. I lit a small fire and I stared at the embers. I thought about Hope, about what she would have said if she had seen me that day, speaking in front of everyone. She would have smiled with those sweet eyes of hers and would have told me, "See, your voice still has strength." And yes, it did, even though many wanted to silence it. A few days later, I received a letter from the foundation to which I had left my assets. They thanked me for the gesture, for the trust, and told me they had already begun to organize a program to house elderly adults abandoned in homes like mine. They even offered to name the project. I told them yes, that it should be called Hope. Not for my wife, but for what she planted in me, because that name meant everything. Reading that, I realized that what I did not only changed my destiny, but was going to change the lives of others. That my pain, channeled with justice and determination, could provide shelter to those who today slept in borrowed beds, eating from charity, feeling less than. And I felt for the first time in years that my story had been worth it. But the world doesn't stop when you find peace. There's always someone who comes to test the calm. One afternoon, someone knocked on the door forcefully. I went out slowly. It was a young girl, tan, slim, with light eyes like Robert's. She must have been about 12, maybe 13. "Are you Mr. Sterling?" I nodded, my heart tightening. "I'm your granddaughter. My mom doesn't know I'm here, but I wanted to meet you." I was speechless. I looked at her, not knowing what to say. My legs trembled. "Can I come in?" I nodded again, opening the door slowly. I offered her a glass of water. She sat down. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. I asked her name. She told me. It was a name Hope had always wanted to give a granddaughter. I felt my soul sink to the floor. "My dad used to talk about you." sometimes good, sometimes bad. But when he got angry, he would shout your name, and I wanted to know who the man was that hurt him so much. I couldn't answer. I had a lump in my throat that wouldn't go away. I don't want anything, Grandpa. I just wanted to know if you existed, and if you still had that kind face I imagined. I chuckled softly. She did too. And there, without knowing how, 2 tears fell from my eyes. Not from sadness, but because for the first time life was giving me back something I thought was lost forever. The girl came 3 more times that month, always alone. Always with that clean gaze as if her heart hadn't yet been soiled by the miseries of the adult world. I didn't ask her about her mother or about Robert, and she didn't talk much about them either. We talked about simple things, about how she took care of her plants at school, about how she liked to write stories, about how she wanted to learn to make beans like mine. She was smart, sweet, and brave. She asked if she could come on Saturdays to read me what she wrote. I told her, of course, that chair on the patio would always be there for her. And so it began. Those Saturdays became the best part of my week. She would sit under the tree with her lined notebook, and she would read me stories about animals, about grandfathers who could fly, about girls who went out into the wilderness to find answers. I would listen with my eyes closed, imagining that hope was also listening from some corner of the sky. I felt full, not happy full. What's more important, because happiness comes and goes, but fullness, that settles in quietly and sustains you. One Saturday, after reading me a story about a bird that couldn't fly but learned to sing, she looked at me and said, "You know, you're a lot like the grandfather in the story." I smiled. "Why, Whoa?" I asked. "Because you don't try to fly, but you make others want to stay." That phrase, I kept it forever. After that, I started to notice something strange. One day I saw Robert standing far away at the end of the road, looking towards the house. He didn't come closer, he just watched. The next Saturday, I learned that he himself had walked the girl to half a block away and waited in silence. I didn't go looking for him, I didn't invite him, but I didn't close the door either. It wasn't long before one day she didn't come. I got worried. I went out to the road, waited for a while. Nothing. That night I slept restlessly. The next morning Robert appeared alone with a haggard face. He greeted me with a timid gesture. "She's sick," he said. "A high fever, nothing serious, I think. But she didn't want me to come without telling you that she waits for you every Saturday." I nodded. I asked if they needed anything. He said no, that he had just enough. But he said it with his eyes downcast, in that way of saying yes from within the silence. He came back 2 days later. He brought a bag of oranges. He left them at the gate. I was watering the plants and walked over. He told me she was getting better, that she was asking for me, that she got angry if he didn't tell her how her grandfather was doing. Yes, she called me her grandfather. Not the old man. Not the gentleman. Her grandfather. Robert stayed in the yard for a while. We didn't talk about us, we talked about her. About how she wrote about how happy a plate of rice with fried plantains made her. I told him that at her age, Hope used to knit clothes for her dolls with scraps of cloth. He laughed. It was the first time I'd seen him laugh without sarcasm in years. He got up to leave and stopped at the door. He looked at me for a long time. "I'm not here for money. Not anymore. I just wanted to tell you that if you ever want to see your grandchildren again, the door is open." I didn't answer, but I didn't give him a cold shoulder either. I just nodded slowly. He understood and left. That night I wrote in my notebook, Not everything is forgiven, but some things are transformed. The following Saturday, the girl returned. With a scarf she had knitted herself, she put it around my neck. "So your heart doesn't get cold," she said. I laughed. And there, in that laugh, I knew that life had come full circle. There was no reconciliation. There was no happy ending. But there was something more powerful. A new truth, clean honest. And in the midst of all this, a letter arrived. A formal invitation signed by the town council. They wanted to give me a recognition for my contribution to the community, for giving the house to the foundation, for the talks at the senior center, for helping to repair the church benches. I didn't know what to say. I kept reading that letter over and over, not out of vanity, but because after so many years, someone was telling me what you are matters, and that I really didn't expect. But what was going to happen at that ceremony would be the true end of everything, or the true beginning. The day of the ceremony arrived with a cool breeze, as if the sky also wanted to clear itself a little. I woke up early. I shaved calmly with the old-fashioned razor I had kept since my youth. I put on my best shirt, a white ironed one with thick buttons, the same one Hope gave me for a birthday. I checked my shoes, put on my hat, and left with plenty of time. The event was to be held in the central square in front of the town hall building. They had told me there would be neighbors' authorities, some children from the school. But what I didn't know was that there would be more. When I arrived, they had already set up a small stage with chairs for the guests and some flowers decorating the front. They greeted me warmly with sincere hugs, with words that didn't sound empty. "Thank you for your example, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for not giving up." I sat in the front row, my heart beating slowly, not from nerves, but from gratitude. I never imagined that at my age someone would invite me to something like this. I always thought that old men like me just faded away in a corner, like forgotten old lamps. The event began. A master of ceremonies spoke of my story, without personal details, but with respect. He mentioned my contribution to the community, my decision to leave my house to the foundation, my words at the senior center. And then they called me to the front. I walked slowly but firmly. The entire square fell silent. I took the microphone. I had no speech, only a full heart. "I am not an important man," I said. "I am just a man who lived, who loved, who fell many times, who was a father, a husband, a construction worker, and who was also an ignored old man. But I am here not because I sought recognition, but because I decided not to disappear." There was a soft murmur among the people. I continued. "Many of us here have felt that we are no longer useful, that we are a burden, that we are in the way. But that's not true. Our lives matter. Our stories matter. And as long as we have a voice, even if it trembles, we must use it." My hand was trembling a little, but my voice came out firm. "I didn't come seeking justice. I came to remember that we are not dead until we stop having dignity." They applauded, slowly but with force. And just as I turned to return to my seat, I saw them. Robert standing at the back with red eyes, with his back straight. Beside him, my granddaughter. And next to her, the other two children. They were holding a sign that said, "Thank you, Grandpa, for not forgetting yourself." I didn't move, I didn't cry, but inside me something rearranged itself. I didn't hug them, I didn't go to them, but I didn't look away either. And in that small moment where the wounds didn't disappear, but they no longer hurt so much, I knew that this story, my story, had now been told completely. That night, I returned home alone, but not empty. I lit a candle, sat in the hammock, opened the blue notebook one last time, and wrote, "Not all children deserve our silence, but we do deserve to live in peace without begging for affection, without returning to where it hurt, without ceasing to be who we are. Today, finally, I am me. And if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to me. I also want to thank you for letting my story have a place and to help ensure that many other voices like mine are not lost. Share this story because every day there is a grandfather out there who also deserves to be heard. Now you tell me what part of this story touched your heart the most, and from what corner of this world are you listening to me?